So what are we going to talk about today? Who's heard the term diversity and inclusion? Great, probably heard it so many times that it's getting on your nerves at this point. I can tell you that since I've retired, I had the opportunity in 2020 to teach 100 trainings to Fortune 500 companies, military bases, and most of the times the conversation never got out of DEI definitions or unconscious bias, or just kind of those baseline DEI strategies. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is not only the why, but the how. Why is it important to the United States Air Force? And when I think about just diversity, we know we hear things like gender, we hear things like race, we hear all these things, but we don't really understand how big it really is. If it's not a foundational pillar, like if you come to DEI training and there's no accountability, it's just entertainment. So DEI training without accountability is nothing but fun and games. And if you look at a lot of PME, I used to teach PME, so I taught at Air University for 5.5 years. I was the only enlisted instructor teaching officers, which I had to wear a suit and tie when I did that because nobody for some reason they didn't want me to do it in my uniform. Weird. But when you think about diversity, a lot of times when somebody walks in the room, I've experienced this in my career, we look at the stripes and not the talent. An airman is a person, but for some reason, oh, that's an airman, therefore they know nothing. Part of our diversity training and part of what we have to think of different is you let a good idea walk out the room or a talented person walk out the door, we lose. And so when we think about what diversity really means and how we look at people, we have to kind of change that mindset and change where we're going with this. All right, so here are the key terms, our key terms. In the current field right now, diversity, equity, inclusion are ones you know. And those are more business imperatives. Most of the metrics you'll find for DEI are gonna be 20% increase in money, more efficient teams, better engagement, supplier diversity. A lot of the metrics you'll find will help you be better at business. But the three big ones of today, which are more moral imperatives, are belonging, justice, and dignity. So when we're looking at diversity and inclusion, all of these terms have depth. What you can also see on my slides, there are a lot of books. So feel free, and you'll get copies of these because there's too many to write down. But I recommend that reading is probably the most powerful tool you have in understanding these broader terms and what they mean and how they're going to apply to you in your sections that you work in. So that's what we're working with today. So when we look forward toward the future and where we're at, I spent about 7 years when I was working at AU. In 2018, they came up with this thing called information as a joint function. So if you kind of look at what happened in Afghanistan and Iraq, which I spent 4.5 years there as a former public affairs combat camera guy, once upon a time, we lost the information battle because we were still doing communication the way we were doing it in 1991. Every airman's a spokesperson. We got to talk to the media and do media training. Got to make products. If I make a product, that means I'm being productive and being effective. And that's not the case. So the way we think about it now, engagement and how we interact with teams, we had to reimagine. So when I was working at AU and really thinking about this, there's no general, no combatant commander that's ever planned a campaign that had information as a joint function as a consideration. So you know what that means? There's no case study. So what happens when there is no case study, there's nothing you can look back on. That means I need everybody in the fleet in the field to figure it out. When we were talking to, at the time, Secretary Mattis, when we said, sir, he came and introduced us, what is the outcome of this? He literally said, I want the information advantage in the information space. That was it. That's the cool thing about being a leader is you can give an end state, drop the mic, and walk out. It's on you, on us, to figure it out. I would love to tell you this. There's no wizard beyond the veil that's figuring this out. It is up to the people in this room to create how we do that in the future. So when you think about missions across the United States Air Force, how I fought, how I deployed, is not going to be what we do in the future. And when you look at all these other things, these other points, what's coming in the recent years, We're not different in the military. From the years in 2008, so how do I explain this? The United States of America has a 1.85 total fertility rate. Here's what that means. For a nation to be healthy, you have to have a 2.2 TFR. That means you're producing babies, and those babies replace the workers of tomorrow. Simple math, the UN keeps these statistics every day. So in the US, because we have a 1.86, that means you have less workers in the workforce to pick from. Recruiting for the United States Air Force did a study about 2 years ago. You're gonna have 300,000 less workers in America to choose from across the spectrum. So what does that mean for recruiting and retention for us? You're not just gonna replace anybody in this room with the next person up. You're not gonna get that back that easy. And when you think about remote work, so for the first time in my life, I work in DC, I live in Michigan, and when I do consulting, I do it all over the country virtually or in person. That's my life. I go into a building once a week. COVID showed, when they were all trying to come back, COVID showed we were more productive in this configuration than we were coming into an office every single day. And our 3-star, where we work at, they were like, "Sir, we can come back to work." And he goes, "Why?" I'm getting more out of people at the crib than I am when they were at the office. Why? Because we're more honest on the telephone. If somebody's pissed off, they're like, "Oshawn, such and such is getting on my nerves." That doesn't happen in the office. No veils, one-on-one phone calls, chats, all those change, and we have more vulnerability, more honesty in this configuration. So when we're thinking about the future and what's different, a lot of times we look at our metrics. Green metrics and being in compliance doesn't mean you have the competitive advantage. And that was when I was in the Air Force. As long as it was green, everybody was happy. But you can be completely compliant, doing everything right, and be in last place. So we have to reimagine, are we doing a good job? Or if something is broke, why do we fix it back to the old state versus thinking, what's next? So when you think about smart cities, when you think about Taiwan 2025, or why we're in AFRICOM, or why the South China Sea is important. Why is South China Sea important? 35% of rare earth minerals are in the South China Sea. Another 35% are on the continent of Africa. Hello, Space Force. Those materials are needed to go to Mars. That's the competition, that's the shift. And sometimes when we're in our seats, we don't think about that because we like to stay in our lanes, but if we don't change our culture and the way we think, we're not gonna win that competition. And in competition, you're not winning and losing anymore, you're either ahead or behind. Infinite Game, Simon Sinek, great book, I recommend you read it. Here's the other thing. There's a 15% skills gap in the United States, well, throughout the world. So what that means when you get a new worker and we hire repetitive jobs, right? If you're a 1035, a PA, you're a 1035, that's what we look for to fill that job. But that person comes in with a skills gap. So that skills gap is $8.5 trillion. That's the price tag to upskill and reskill all these people. Anybody in here heard of data science? What about data teams? Who has a data team in their unit, not on the base? Who uses data to make decisions right now? Okay, we got 1, 2, 3. Who's ever heard of data decision? Who hasn't heard of data decision making? So when you kind of think of these things, data science, data teams, if you think about smart cities, who's heard the term smart cities? So smart city development, right? That's instrumentation, analysis, resources, that new buildings, new ways of working, sustainability models. We don't have the people, and schools can't keep up with it, learning those things on a day-to-day basis. So when you come out of the high school or college or whatever, you're ill-prepared to win this battle. So that requires not just being an SME in one skill set, it requires you having more than one skill set, getting more certifications, thinking beyond your personal experience. So if you've got a kid in high school right now, these are the jobs in demand across the world. Why does it matter? Because the diffusion of technology allows us to hire people anywhere. So if you have a kid in high school right now, the most in-demand skills are trade skills, not college degree skills. That's what's missing. So, and this group, Manpower Pro, does this study every year. And for the DoD, there's a thing called Business Executives for National Strategy. So write that down, I'll have a slide for it. And that is the talent management report that business leaders do for the DoD every year. That's Business Executives for National Strategy. So when we look at the type of people that we need, the type of training, the type of skills that's lacking, us in the DoD and the world are looking for certain types of people to fulfill these missions. And you'll get these slides when I'm done, so if I'm going too fast. And feel free to stop me if you have questions. So when we're looking at DEI, one of the things we have to do is plan for the future of work and think about recruiting and retention, not just people in uniform, but our civilian force. What I do right now, the same ideas, same thoughts I had in uniform. The first time I came up with this concept and teaching this class, I was at Air University, and I was a master sergeant. And I couldn't teach it because I was E7, and E7s don't teach generals. I left. So when you leave, that talent's no longer in uniform. Most of the people I work with didn't have to retire. They left because the Air Force, for some reason, stopped listening. And when you let that talent walk out of the door, are we better or worse? Because I look at it like this. I was doing this for free, what an E7 makes. Not no more. So we have that type of talent on active duty, but we don't listen to it. We don't pay attention to it. And we have to look beyond just the rank structure. And what we're promoting, who we're promoting. Are we promoting diverse skills? Are we looking at least when I was in, it was a checkbox to get your CCAF and a degree. You never had to apply it. I mean, that's why you get so many people that say, I got 3 master's degrees, but they're a tactical person because all they're asked to do is check the box. And when you go to PME, what do we teach you? How to be a leader. So you can mask that and fake that all day long. So when we're talking about diversity and inclusion has been around, when we talk about the future of the workforce, it's been around since 1964. Title VII, 1964 Civil Rights Act. This is not a new concept. The precursor to diversity and inclusion is something called sensitivity training. Heard of these things before? The reason why they don't stick is because we don't put the money, the manpower, and we don't put the sustainability into it. It's event-based, right? Everybody's doing this because of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, that happened in 2020. We sat down, all of a sudden, 112% increase in DEI training, 84% increase in hiring a DEI officer. But you know why it's not sustainable? Because it's event-based. DEI is a journey. It's not a moment in time. It's something you have to be persistent and consistent at. And when you're thinking about building the workforce of the future, you have 5 generations in the workplace right now. Todd talked about it earlier about young people leaving, about young people in the workforce and what they see, and the great exodus. Young people aren't working anymore for just pay, not just for compensation. They're looking at, do you have sustainable? What's your social impact? What are you doing for people? Am I working in a diverse workplace? And not just theater diversity, right? Symbolic diversity. So symbolic diversity is, look, we had a unity day that did not solve your problems. That doesn't change behavior. If a law changed behavior, then the Civil Rights Act of 1964, everybody would have been like, oh, that's all we got to do is get along, treat people fair? Oh, my behavior has changed. No, it hasn't. What we show people what to do is how to put a mask on and fake it until you get there. So when we're talking about this future of work, you have to appeal to 2 things in people. Either their business imperative or their moral imperative. Hate to say it, diversity is not growing because everybody cares about it. Diversity started growing because people thought, man, I'm gonna lose a lot of money if I don't get this thing under control. That's not a moral imperative, that's a business imperative. So the case I'm laying out, the business case for DEI, is a serious one. But if it's not authentic, the difference is if all of it's just theatrics, people will see through it. And then you'll be done. We won't have the talent we need going into the future. One of the ways we start changing is global mindsets. So reading, there's a great book called Range. Dave Epstein talks about the future of work and gig economy, about adding to your skill sets. So I have a degree in mass communication. I'm also certified in resilience team building. I'm also certified in diversity, inclusion, and belonging. I'm also certified in web analytics and data decision making. Why? Because when the job I'm in right now required all those skill sets. I needed each one of them. I'm a program manager, so I'm not a PMP. That's another skill set that I needed. I got lucky, I got hired, but all those things go into my job. So when we're looking at people and developing and the mindset and the reading, what else do we need? So when you're talking about your intellectual capital, just having a broad knowledge of things, your psychological capital and your social capital, you're really getting to know people. That's your business intelligence. So when you don't have business intelligence and you don't have intellectual curiosity in your organization, you're doomed. Anybody heard of a person named Charlie Munger? Great, got one person, great, it's always one. So Charlie Munger created kind of this concept. He really liked reading biographies because of what he could learn from different biographies and different people. And what he believed is by learning from different people, you come up with new shared mental models. In other words, if you want to do change management, that's why there's 343 change management theories. Because people really looked at their place of work and said, this is what we need to do to change here. What we like in the military, and I'm gonna criticize my own people because I'm one of you. We love a case study. Because you know what a case study means? I don't have to do the work. If I can go just ask somebody else how they did it, I don't actually have to sit down and do the work and analyze my organization. We have to stop doing that. Just because the case study worked over here doesn't mean it's gonna work here. You have to get to know where you work, your people, and your future. When we don't focus on those things and we kind of look at these case studies and use cases, we kind of get lost in the sauce. It's okay to take some stuff for inspiration, but you got to work with the personnel and the mission that you have here. So global mindsets. Thunderbird School, if you had a business degree, they sent you to the Thunderbird School at Arizona State. They have a lot of great materials on their website. Next, and this is small, so don't worry, you get it because it's meant to kind of as a handout. When you're putting together your DEI, what are you being asked to field? If you don't have governance, so that's the oversight, a plan of attack, a strategy. If you don't have architecture, that means, are you organized? Do you have people? Are you putting together teams and task force? If you're talking about strategy, you have to have an approach, an actual plan in the end state, and then sustainability. Too many of these programs, Sergeant Baker, when he leaves, this program goes away if he's the only person in it. So we cannot have that anymore. It's an all-in thing. And organization to organization, unit to unit, all have to have some sort of a diversity plan that they're looking at because he needs that data to adjust and be agile. So when you're using this GAS model, that approach, and you're looking at governance, architecture, strategy, and sustainability, you can apply this to any business or anything you're trying to add. DEI is too much added like an add-on, like a spoiler on the car, and it's really part of the engine. So it has to be part of the pillar of the future and not just something we're doing on the side and resulting in days like this. So the four main, well, there's three main, one added recently. When you're looking at DEI maturity, it all starts with your workplace, your workforce, then the marketplace that you're in. That's kind of the four pillars. The latest one is social impact. In every DEI phase, the first thing you start with is a current state assessment. Where are we at? So when you're looking at current state assessments, you want to do an overall one. How is our unit? Where are we at right now? But you want to look at learning and development. You want to look at recruiting and retention. You want to look at who are we hiring? Who's getting promoted? How is pay going? You want to do these assessments and you want to really get in depth and down to the bottom of where are we at? Where do we need to go? And how do we need to get there? So strategy starts with that initial research. And you got to dive deep, and you can't be afraid what you find there. I would always know, so I'll ask you this. How many people work in a building that if you have bad news to tell the boss, You try to figure out how to say it in a different way because you're afraid of how they react. Raise your hand, don't be afraid. Okay, so when you feel that way, whether it's perceived or real, I'm gonna tell you right now, you're in a possible toxic work environment. Any place where truth can't be delivered, and that's what current state assessments are, truth. If I can't tell you the truth without a backlash, you're in a toxic work environment. We should be able to hear that. Some of the best leaders I work with wanted to know the truth. And senior leaders are the most lied to people in any installation. They don't find out about it until ship's turned over and it's on fire. Then you're like, sir, solve this. Something you knew about 5 months ago. And what I found is, it's not the person at the bottom who wanted to tell, or the person at the top who didn't want to know. It's the middle managers who are more worried about their career and didn't have the moral courage to tell the truth. So DEI, all this change has to be done at every level. And you can't be afraid to lose your job. Sometimes the truth and the facts are not on your side. The facts are we're failing, we're not doing a good job. But how do we get better and how do we grow from here? And that's okay. Got to get comfortable with that. This is a little small, but this is an example of every measurable area for diversity, inclusion, and belonging. All those can be measured. That comes from Gartner, great place. So this is data-driven. So I'm looking at hiring, I'm looking at people, I'm looking across the board. All these things I could measure if I was in charge of diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And I'll make sure you get there. And these things need to be checked, rechecked, checked again, and checked forever after. Again, you don't have goals in DEI because goals indicate you've accomplished something. You have milestones. It's a journey. Remember, we talked about this earlier. It's a journey that you're on. And you got to be careful. A lot of times we do our metrics, we have target groups, right? We don't have enough black people. We don't have enough women. So we got to be careful that you don't over-focus on target groups because inclusive leadership includes everybody. You're not trying to just make the workforce lean more in favor to one group, a target group or another. You're really trying to make it inclusive. And a lot of times when we do training, we don't keep that in mind, that it's about being an inclusive leader and trying to get us all there. We do know it starts with understanding. We know it starts with thinking. But when you get there and look at these metrics, you don't want to turn it into, what it turns into a lot is I'm now mad at this group of people. You was mad before, but we don't want that to continue to happen. So we have to figure that out. The one thing that I would say in all of this, and probably the hardest thing to measure is, I can't measure your heart. I can't make you change how you feel. If you don't like a certain group of people, you don't like a certain gender, LGBT, whatever the thing is you're biased against, that's really what the bottom line. Because I can fake like I like you. Anybody ever had to fake like they like somebody? Yeah, we good at that. All of us probably got PhDs. Player hater degrees. It's an old school term, but we all have them. We have people we just don't like. That's a human factor. But sometimes that bias can overcome, how you're thinking, or somebody's from your hometown. We have a natural, so there's this thing called schema theory in social science. So if I ask everybody close your eyes in here. I want you to picture a professor at a university. Put that picture in your mind. Now, I'm going to point to one person. Ma'am, Major Pridgen. That's your name? Okay. Describe that professor to me. He's medium height. You said male? Male. What color is he? He looks like Denzel Washington. Okay.
You want to know what he has on?
Sure. Tell me what he has on.
He has on
A suit.
Gray.
Gray suit. What kind of tie? Blue tie. Is it a bow tie or a straight tie? Is it a bow tie? What about the jacket?
Gray.
It's gray. Does it have the patches on the sleeve?
No.
Anybody's professor have patches on the sleeve? Okay, one person. So your mental schema, and this is anybody can do a self-test. If I just said, what does a pilot look like? What does a doctor look like? And you wrote that is your default setting. That's just how you see it. There's nothing wrong with how you see it, but it's a better understand about schema theory is when you're talking to somebody and they interpret it. How many people were shocked when she said the professor was black and looked like Denzel? Whose professor who had a minority professor? Two? Whose professor was white? Because your mental schema goes right there, correct? And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just your default setting. I was actually shocked. It's only happened twice, but somebody's like, he looked like Denzel, and that's perfect. So when you're thinking about that, that's what you're talking to every day. When you communicate, a mental schema. So when you go base to base, so DEI strategy, if I had a bad time with leadership at my last base, do I trust leadership at my new base? Because my mental schema is leaders don't help. Or if I had a supervisor who didn't do who never gave me a feedback, but was doing my reports, my mental schema of leaders that's what they do. It's actually shocking when somebody's nice to you. So when you think about our mental schemas and what we have to get over, that's part of what you're playing in. And so when you're trying to change behaviors, that's the hard part. Behavior is the key. Getting really somebody to change, have a change of heart, and then be an ally when they come out on the other side, not angry at target groups. So when you're looking at HR, so you're hiring, people analytics, wellness analytics are very important. So how many people have a wearable on their arm? Okay. So one of the things with wellness analytics, a lot of companies I started working with for DEI strategy, wellness has become a big thing, psychological safety. So one of the things they gave us all is watches to wear. And some of those watches, though, were tracking people. So when you're talking about Internet of Things, this is why it's a DEI point, and talking about wellness, you actually have to have these conversations around privacy. Like the intent was wellness. What it turned out to be is something that was tracking their workers. They didn't do that intentionally, they just bought a bunch of Fitbits and handed them out. So when we're thinking about wellness and we're thinking about how it's connected, you're not talking about HR, you're talking about your people metrics, your psychological safety, your EO. You really have to have teams that are really sitting there thinking about, how are we collecting this data and are we doing it in ways that everybody feels safe? So when you're talking about people analytics and wellness and part of your psychological safety coming to work, and why is that important? If I don't feel like I'm welcome here and I don't feel like you want me here, am I going to give you my best ideas? Has anybody seen or felt this before? You could say something to fix the problem, but I don't like you. Anybody gave that kind of energy? I'll be honest with myself, I've done that a few times. I could help them, but I don't like them, so therefore, I'm gonna walk past it. We shouldn't be like that, but that's human nature. We don't give, we'll come to work on autopilot, not be seen. I wanna come here, do my job, wait till the PCS. We gotta get people out of that. So when you're showing you care, you have to invest in that. Saying you care means a lot, yes, but the action behind it is what means the most. Because we can say anything to anybody, but if we're not investing in these kind of things, and I brought up earlier, information as a joint function. So I spent all those years as a PA, and non-kinetic warfare is not something my commanders invested in. They wanted it, but they didn't put any money into it. So when you're talking about diversity strategy, you can't hire one person and say, you got it. Not possible. You have to actually invest in it, put the infrastructure, or it's not gonna work. So with anything, if you care about it, it's gonna be shown through your actions, your resources, and the follow-up. Remember, DEI training or any of this training without accountability is just theater. So one thing to think about is your learning and development. So this is a model that I created when we're talking about developing people for the DEI world. There are many factors that help you to be a diverse and inclusive leader. It's okay if you don't personally like it. This is not the point. I have to be able to leverage it, though, better than China, Russia, and our near-peer competitors. The one thing, everybody in uniform or part of this DOD, we're in a competition. So we don't get to not like things and not study them. And that's what I found working at AU, is everybody was like, we need to do information as a joint function. I'm like, well, sir, what do you know about cell phones? Oh, I don't like cell phones. Like, right, so you don't like it, therefore we don't invest in it because your personal like is stopping our overall progress. So you have to say that to leaders sometimes. Their personal dislikes can't stop the overall process. One person can't stop us moving forward. So not liking it and not liking something, and we're all gonna be there, but it's also lack of comfortability. Because how do we do cyber? One of my months I hate it, and I think it's this month, and I'm sorry for any cyber people in here. Cybersecurity month, the whole month. You're gonna die, they're gonna steal all your stuff, stay offline. We spend a whole month yelling that, then the next month we're like, we gotta really get on technology. You just scared the hell out of everybody for 30 days. And every time we get new technology, that's the first thing we think about is vulnerable. But we don't think about the capabilities. So new PA mindset, public affairs and communication strategy, that's what the new students are. Information function, information capabilities for information advantage. So in other words, I have to be able to use that cell phone, I have to be able to use that computer, I have to use those capabilities to give you information advantage. And I can't do that if it's all locked down. So I got to get cyber in the room, CLG6, public affairs, and we have to figure out how we leverage those capabilities better than our enemy. The other thing is, why do we have products through 70 people? How come we don't trust our people? Because at some point we're going to have to. Our enemies do proxy warfare, gray zone warfare. And if you read a book called Like War, 17-year-old Moldovians were the ones tweeting out most of the messages on Twitter that were impacting our elections in 2016. 17-year-old kids. But we got to get permission from 57 people to tweet hello on the internet. That makes no sense. So command and control, mission type orders are important to a colonel. But I cannot trust the field if we don't raise up our skill sets and develop people to do these things. Because it's easier said than done, right? Like I say, I want people to communicate in this manner, but if I don't train them, again, that comes with investment. And I don't show the outcomes we're trying to get to, we're not gonna get the competitive advantage. And for a lot of people, and I'm advocating for my career field a little bit, but they saw us as the people who take pictures and write stories, never the people that are supposed to get you the information advantage and command the information space. Public affairs and communication strategy are the only people who, on a stateside mission, own the overt information space. There is no intel stateside. There is no IO. It's only your public affairs folks. And what they're regulated to doing is making products for Hearts Apart stories or writing press releases. If we don't demand more from that field and then invest for them to do that, we're not going to win. The next war, the bullet's not going to be shot out of a gun. The next war is digital. You don't win that space, you lose. So you have to change your mindset and expectations from what you traditionally got. So sorry, PA, if I'm putting the pressure on you, but that's where we have to go. I feel dedicated to it because not only am I talking about it, I spent 2.5 years rewriting the curriculum at DINFOS to get us there. And so we have to change our mindset. We're not the only field that needs to change. Maintenance, how we fly, how we fight, how we deploy, all that has to change. One thing, anybody heard of a RAV power converter? Know what that is? Anybody have a power bank for their phone? You know what that is? So in the old school, we probably think, man, I had to go buy this generator. You can actually go online today, buy a RAV converter, and it's like 50,000 volts battery. I can plug my cell phone in there and laptop for 3-4 days. No longer have to buy a generator. Has anybody heard of a momentum lens? You know what that is? So if you have a momentum lens, you can put that on the end of your iPhone 13 or your Samsung, and you have basically a Canon. Momentum lenses are like $139, and the new cell phones are equipped where I could take pictures like a professional. What about a beast cage? Anybody heard of that? So a beast cage is something that I can go buy, and if you want everyone to shoot commercials and movies, I can buy a beast cage, put it on a tripod, and have the equivalent of shooting a movie or a commercial at the local level. Why am I saying all this? If those things exist and we're not using it, our enemy combatants know this and they use these things. But my cell phone that I have for my job is a paperweight because it's so locked down, I can only use it to make phone calls. Why give it to me? So we have to change our mentality and think outside the box. It's really not thinking outside the box. This technology just exists. We're just not using it, but your enemies are. So I'll go on there, developing our people and really focusing on that data and technology part. So understand this. We all have a lived experience. I'm an African-American male, and my experience is not your experience. It's a tough experience. I will say that in life, in theory, we all have to climb a mountain, right, to get to where we want to in life. And I don't discount anybody's journey. But it's tough to, if climbing a mountain is tough, you grew up poor, no matter what your demographic is, it's tough to climb that mountain. But if I got to do it with no equipment or barbed wire fence, it doesn't discount that climbing the mountain is tough, but it's really tough if you got to do it with barriers. So when we're looking at each other from perspectives and perspectives of journeys, that's the one thing we have to understand is if we really care about one another, we're going to want to remove those barriers for one another so I can get the best out of somebody. And just because we don't have the same experience, we can't discount the experience of another person. And I think we too often walk past that. And the one thing we always talk about airmanship and we share each other's stories, we really don't. We kind of listen, but we don't listen to act. And so when we're trying to look at where to go, and the frustration of 2020, I really got tired of people asking me this question. Oshawn, what should I read? I'm like, why are you asking me? You're the one that wants to study and know more. I'm not the Sherpa. I'm not your guide. You can't quote Dr. King and then never have read his books. But I hear quotes from him all the time. I saw a whole bunch in 2020. Well, Dr. King said this. He said, great, you know the last lines of the speech. Way to go. He also wrote 4 books. Probably should check them out. But we have to take those 2 steps. You want to know about the LGBTQ community? Jennifer Brown wrote that book called Inclusive Leadership. Read the books by people from different backgrounds than you have. Take that time. Charlie Munger had this idea a long time ago. It's not a new concept. Reading biographies from people who have different experiences from you helps you with your cultural intelligence. Period. If you don't take those 2 steps, it's insincere. We're talking about being a vulnerable leader. Take those steps yourself. And we know you're not going to learn everything just from reading a book. But if you're going to start a conversation because I took some steps to learn more about your culture, where you're from, your experience, so we can have a real conversation. Because without that step, we're talking past each other. So that's one area we can all get better, because those assumptions and those personal conflicts at work, that leads to the frustration. And again, think about where we're trying to go overall. Can't get there. We can't have those good personal conversations. So one way to start those off with DEI is employee resource groups. That's getting affinity groups together to kind of talk about subjects. And not just those moral imperatives, but those business imperatives. Getting people from around the base to kind of have these raw discussions and then come up with outcomes for the commander. So commanders get problems, but they need solutions that come from you. Stuff that we can do. Everybody can complain. If you go with Twitter, everybody can do that. Everybody's skilled at complaining and talking crap. But what we're not good at is exploratory problem solving and actually figuring out how do we actually solve this and fix this. And that's the effort it takes. So when you're putting employee resource groups together and putting affinity groups together, that is something that helps the DEI person to kind of know, hey, what is the culture and the climate like throughout the organization? How does this group feel? How does this group feel? And when you get all those perspectives in a room and you kind of hear it raw, it makes it easier to solve problems. So ERGs is a good thing to leverage. The next is when you're having these groups, these are the 5 most popular topics. So if you look at the right side of the screen, think of those as moral imperatives, business imperatives. So you kind of look at the topics that are discussed the most, according to HBR, Harvard Business Review. So what's missing? The actual issue? So getting down to the nitty-gritty. Thank you. So getting down to the actual problem that needs to be solved. Because the affinity group is, so think about this. The affinity group are women having a meeting. Within that meeting, they're discussing issues. So if you have race and ethnicity, you may have affinity groups that are Latino, Black, or whatever, and they're discussing issues, LGBTQ, and they're discussing their experiences and issues and barriers that they're seeing in the organization. So what the outcome of these meetings should be, they should be discussing these issues together. they're not really getting in there and talking about women. An affinity group is people from the same group having a discussion and then bringing those outcomes to leadership. Does that make sense? And then on the other side is people looking at the business. Let's look at overall recruiting and retention. When you take the data from both sides and put that together, you have a better sight picture of what you need to do throughout the organization to make it more inclusive, diverse, blah, blah, blah. Does that make sense? So anybody else, anything missing or questions on this slide?
Can you give me an example of human resource policy of what maybe an affinity group of women would see in that? I guess I'm not, some of those don't apply, I don't see how they apply to the military, some of those terminologies use different terms. So.
Right. So human resource policy may be how we hire, who we hire. So in PA, for example, I'm gonna use an example because that's my old career field. We're only hiring 1035s. So instead of just hiring 1035s, because right now you have to go to DINFOS, you have to be a DINFOS grad, and we end up getting the same people. But we don't have, what DINFOS doesn't teach you is something like community psychology. But how that policy is currently written, I can't hire that person and put them in a PA shop. So when we're looking at our policies that only a certain amount of people with this type of credential can work here, we're missing out on certain skill sets and offices because of how the policy is written. And the policy may not be just local, it may be just how the Air Force wrote it. And that requires a certain amount of work, but we still got to do it. So we have to look at those things. So I always say this, policy is written in pencil, so I love it because it can be changed. When somebody says, that's what the policy says, I say, okay, well, at some point the policy is wrong. And if you have data that backs it up, then you got to bring it to leadership to see what can be done about it. Some things can be done on a local level, some stuff has to be elevated. But if you can change something, do so. Did that clarify it? Okay. Marketing to employees is, especially in the military, is I think sometimes we message ourselves in the DoD instead of having real conversations. So I remember when the Airman's Creed, which is these are all E7 and above in here, or it doesn't matter. So I'm going to tell a story from my perspective when it first came out. It wasn't as authentic as it is today. When it first came out, it was something we just did, and we marketed it as something it wasn't. And therefore, a lot of my class didn't buy into it. So you don't want to do things like that to kind of keep up with your sister services. You want stuff to be born in authenticity. Now today's airmen don't know that. So for them, it's tradition, but it wasn't. And there's still some people from my era that are still in, but we have to be careful when we're doing that and just do it in honesty. If they just would have told us, listen, we're starting this new thing because we want to do X, Y, Z, that would have been honest, but that's not how it was sold to us. It was sold to us in patriotism and a whole made-up story. And that's not cool. We don't have to do that to our people. We can just be honest with our people when we kind of bring these things to light. Don't be mad at me for telling that story. Here's the other thing that's really big in business as far as diversity and what affinity groups can help you get to. So there's this thing called ESG investments. So what a corporation does on the outside, this is where they put their money to kind of get, to have social impacts in communities. So when we're looking at why ESGs are important in corporations right now, if diversity brings a 25-30% increase in profits, and you're basically making money off of somebody's intellectual property, their ideas, and they're not seeing that reinvestment into their communities, people are walking away from these companies. So when we go into a local area, especially on a base in the Air Force, where do we volunteer? Where are we making those impacts? Are we just going to Habitat for Humanity, which is great, it's a national organization, but are we looking at those local places that we can have a real impact? Are we looking at community gardens? Are we looking at minority groups that we can engage with? If the only place that you can get African-American workers every African-American did not just go to HBCU, that's not the only place to get talent of color. It's weird that they go to colleges all around the country. So you're gonna have to broaden how we look at talent, where we get people, and where we invest. So it just broadens that where we engage, where you volunteer. So for us in the military, our return on investment is if people see you in the community doing great things, and they go, I want to be like that group, That helps with recruiting and retention. It's all tied in together. If I see you, if you're bringing that kind of training. So go back to that HR talent. If you have that talent in the Air Force and you're partnering with high schools, what does that mean? Well, I can do that. I could be on a data team. I could be in Space Force. I can do all these things. Are we looking at the future and tying what our ESG investment would be, which is recruiting and retention, into that kind of mindset when we're looking at our outreach and engagement activities? Does that make sense? So last but not least, not last but not least, but one thing to really think about is yourself. I would love to put it on leadership to bring about these changes, but this is everybody. And one thing that always came to my mind is you have to position yourself to fix what you complain about. It is not on that person to fix your problem. You are a part of it. Diversity and inclusion is more about passion than about experience. If you care about something, you could do it. So you have to position yourself, talking to the right people, being an influencer. Anger goes a long way, but it doesn't accomplish much. So we can scream about it every year, but doing something about it is what really matters. So that's proactive skill sets. Proactive skill sets is not waiting and sitting back, coming with an idea, even if your first idea is bad. That's why you need people. I may know we need to do something, but I might need to get with an expert. And that's okay. Sometimes all you are is a spark. The spark is great because that's what starts fires. So be the spark. Ikaki. It's a Japanese phrase. I graduated high school, Yokota Air Base, Japan. Anybody been to Yokota? Okay. YHS Panthers. Weirdly, first base I was ever at. Didn't think I'd ever be a Yokota Panther. But they wake up every day with purpose. So I encourage everybody in here to wake up every day with purpose. Have a purpose to get something done. And DEI work takes great purpose. Global mindset, we talked about it, I won't harp back on it. Ubuntu. Ubuntu is an African term. And it means if I'm not happy, if you're not happy, I'm not happy. So if we kind of had that collaborative spirit, that if you're not comfortable here, I'm not comfortable here, then we work to make it better. So waking up with that attitude every day. And then last, whatever your faith is, having that as the foundation of what you do on a day-to-day basis. There are no atheists in foxholes. Every time we went out on convoys back in the day, everybody prayed together. Because when we were downrange, it's weird, we knew how to work as a team. There was no politics. Nobody cared about your race or religion. We cared about coming home. So I wish we could bottle that mindset and do that every day. Because the number one thing was, are you okay? Because if you're okay, I'm okay. That's real airmanship. Is I can look at you and have conversations and mean it. So positioning yourself to fix what you complain about. Commanders we used to teach open door policy. I used to have an open door policy. I have 4 children. I have an open door policy. They can walk in, but not much is going to change. Open door policies are great, but what can be done? We used to teach at the commander school. We used to encourage them to have a walk the floor mentality. The reason is when the commander's coming to visit, what does everybody do? Roll out the red carpet, clean up them peanuts, take all the bad airmen and let them have the day off and put our best foot forward. I can't get truth like that. But if I walk the floor and just show up, have a conversation, I can get more truth. Because if you can solve problems before they blow up, you have a better chance at staying ahead of it and getting the truth. If it's a toxic work environment, I hate to say this, you can get promoted, it doesn't mean you can lead. So those are 2 different things. And it's hard, right? Everybody's not a transformational leader. Some people know I can take the test, got the PT right, I can do all the things the box says. But that character and leadership is not always a thing. And most people are afraid to ask for coaching. Hate to say this, but it's okay to get coaching if you're struggling as a leader. It's okay to ask for that, because you're not going to always know what to do. And it's harder than you think. Anybody, who's a first-time supervisor here? Who's a 10th time or second time, third time? It gets easier over time, but when you run into those personalities where I got to pay attention to this person every day. That gets on your nerves. I don't care how grown you are, you're a human being, and there are days you come to work and you're like, I wish this person was on leave. That sucks with being in charge. We're not honest. You don't come to work every day focused. You have difficult people. Relationships are messy, they're difficult, they're hard. So if you got to get that coach and get that help, do that. So every day, position yourself to fix what you complain about. This is one of my favorite people, and kind of reflective of who I am. Don't let anybody put their expectations of you on you. So a lot of times, people will marginalize you or take away your voice or misconstrue your intent. Do not allow that to happen. Speak up. I don't do DEI because it pays. I do because I've seen the effects in the military. I saw the effects as getting this great job that I thought, man, I get to teach at this Air University, but it really sucked that I had to wear a bow tie to teach classes, because the first time I taught a class, there were certain officers that said, why is an enlisted guy teaching us? Well, mainly because I was qualified to teach you, and my leadership put me in that position. But you had, the decision was, put him in a bow tie. And I heard, unfortunately, what some of our senior leaders would say. Well, enlisted people don't think like this. I'm like, yeah, I just wrote your course, but okay. I couldn't say that out loud. I wanted to so bad. But I got to teach in my uniform in the commander school. It was weird because it's like colonels didn't care. They're like, that's the person they put in front of us. That's what I'm listening to today. But it was weird that the middle management just couldn't take it. You can't do that. No more. If we want the best talent, we want the best people. If an airman walks in, have a great story. Had a kid that worked at Johnson & Johnson. I don't know why he joined the military. He had 2 stripes. Had a commander who's like, I'm putting together a comp plan, doing this big thing. So I sent the airman. And a commander called me and said, I thought I was going to be taken seriously when I told you how big this was. So I said, okay. I looked around my office. I said, I have a captain. They just graduated Defense Information School. I said, I have an airman over here who's getting her mass communications degree. Or I have the young man that was the deputy of marketing for Johnson & Johnson that's sitting in your office. So you tell me which one of these other people you'd like me to send, and you just let me know. He said, thank you, hung up the phone. So those expectations with that airman that walks in the door, airmen are walking in with different skill sets than we had. So we have to get them to use their strengths in the Air Force. We need that talent. We need people, when they take off the uniform, still care enough to come back, right? Some people will never come and speak in front of an Air Force crowd because they're that hurt. That's not how I feel about it. I wasn't mad at the Air Force. It was people. Air Force didn't do anything wrong to me. A lot of great people in the Air Force. So you don't let 1 or 2 bad people turn you off on everybody. You come back and you try to make it better than it was for you. That's the one thing that we all have the ability to do, right? Those expectations. The other thing is to keep this in mind. It's possible you might be wrong. I've been married for 23 years. I've learned this lesson the hard way, that possibly I might be wrong. Truth, especially in this era that we live in, misinformation, disinformation, malinformation. The tough things we can't talk about at work, but the things that we see on television, the things that we see online, they come into the workplace. And no perspective has the monopoly on truth. So we gotta be able to have the hard conversations and still figure out how to work together. Because at the end of the day, that 1.86 total fertility rate, if we don't get together in America, we don't have the people to compete. So if we cannot learn how to work with others, we will not win this competition. We will not be ahead. So our gender hang-ups, the race hang-ups, all of that has to end, or else we don't get there. And we need all those perspectives in the room until we can figure it out. That's the series of that's the data, right? And so when you think about Americans, there are 338 million of us. And I would love to say we get all the 18 people. If the Air Force was a draft, we get a lot of 4th round and 5th round draft picks. I joined the military on a waiver at grand theft auto and assault. Got into a fight when I was in high school. And 16 LOCs in my first year and a half. Look, you could do that back then though. That was before 9/11. Get an LOC, it was, put it in the drawer, yell at you. So I was like, anybody seen Glorious Bastards? I was him. You're gonna get court-martialed for this. No, I'll get yelled at. I've been yelled at before. But we have to keep that young talent. I'm only in the Air Force because somebody saw something in me. In other words, we can't be a one-mistake military either. You have to be allowed to be young. When I go back and look, that kid was 20. I'm not the same person, but if you never get a chance to grow up, some people, we throw them away at age 23. We gotta stop doing that. Because how you are at that age, you change. You gotta give people, you gotta see the talent in somebody, give them an opportunity to excel. Because if you don't, and we just let that person walk, we let a lot of talent walk out the door. Again, can't afford to do that anymore.